So let's start off. Today we're going to be talking about virtual SAN, or as many of you and we have in the market started referring to it as VSAN. VSAN was an announcement during VMworld 2013 last year in San Francisco, and we gained a tremendous amount of industry publicity with it. A lot of folks were saying this was going to be the next new and disruptive technology in the marketplace, and I think that that's probably more or less the case. To introduce myself, my name is Kevin Growth, Senior Systems Engineer and Technical Partner Manager, working here on behalf with Tech Data Corporation to bring you this enablement session today. And during the course of this, we're going to be, sitting at what I would consider probably about a 201 level on virtual SAN. Specifically, what that means to me is we're going to be moving a little bit, past the basics of, hey, VSAN is really cool, and we're going to be talking a little bit more about what you can do with it, how you're going to position it, how it's priced, how it's packaged, and what does this mean to the industry, and where are the verticals that it's going to play the best. So the goal for today is to have everyone walk out and have a little better understanding of what they're going to do with virtual SAN next. So I think that any solution starts with an opportunity. That said, let's take a look at the market opportunity that exists before us when we talk about virtual SAN. VMware sees storage and has as a really tremendous opportunity, and we believe that we are uniquely positioned to be a leader in software-defined storage. If we look at some of the information that came out of IDC, one of the really dramatic numbers is that there's approximately a $38 billion storage market revenue opportunity, and that's really a number that nobody can, as my grandfather would say, shake a stick at, right? And so if we consider what we're all doing with all of our great work inside of the compute virtualization stack and the stuff we're doing inside of cloud, just from a marketing perspective, this is enormous. Not to mention, $1.8 billion in commercial software-based storage revenue, by 2015. And this hyper-converged, software-defined storage is really the fastest-growing segment out in the market today. This number is actually a little bit off. It was more than this. I think it was north of 12,000. We had just over 12,000 people who registered for the virtual SAN public beta just inside of 6 months. And one of the really exciting things was out of that 12,000, they were given a poll, a little survey to complete. And one of the questions they were asked was, do you feel after having used virtual SAN that this is going to do for storage what vSphere did for compute? And I think resoundingly so, 90% of them all said yes, which was great, because at the end of the day, that's what we were out here, that's what we were wanting to see happen. And, basically right now, as far as we're talking about market opportunity, the estimation, at least during beta from the feedback we were getting is, you're looking at an average, potential $100,000 deal size, for virtual SAN using like a large 16-node cluster. And we actually have all known now, since we've gone into GA, that virtual SAN can be scaled much larger than that. So what's been happening since VMworld, since the announcements? Well, obviously over here we see, we see our announcement point back on 8/26 when Pat Gelsinger came out and he announced virtual SAN to the world. we've only had, again, a tremendous amount of growth. It just skyrocketed for us, during those next 4 months as the beta adoption rolled out. Currently, just inside the community, we have almost 6,000 folks active inside of the users community. And not that I'm too big a adherent to what the blogosphere or the Twittersphere says about things, but if we look at just the people that are talking about virtual SAN, again, that's a pretty impressive number for a technology that's just coming out into GA. So into kind of what this means and why we're all uniquely positioned to take advantage of VMware storage, and particularly virtual SAN. If we look at the total opportunity, right? It's not just about going out and motioning storage inside of a virtualization space. This is really about communicating the entire message, specifically as we talk about the software-defined data center and the software-defined enterprise. It's more than just compute. It's more than just security. It's more than the things that we've done in the past and we've all done so well. We're talking about integrating networking. We're also talking about integrating storage, which is why we're here today, and being able to modernize that data center so that their data center can scale up and scale out, has the ability to also scale back in as necessary. And that's a very important component when we talk about the software-defined data center, these ideas of policy-based storage and policy-based automation, allowing things to grow, but also allowing them to retract as needed so that the customer is seeing real value across the board. This also allows you as resellers and as sales folks to expand out that footprint into the accounts so that you're not just talking about compute, you're not just talking about software in particular, you're reaching that trusted advisor, strategic partner type of status inside of your customer's environment, where you're able to talk and speak not only to what's going on, what their specific pain points are, but where they're wanting to go inside of this software-defined journey. And when we talk about those conversations, there are new people involved in the conversations. It's not just the IT guy. It's not just the storage guy. It's not necessarily just the chief information officer anymore, who's leaning hard and wanting to know, how much is this going to cost, per gigabyte, right? I mean, that was always the discussion. Every conference room I sat in for years, it always came down to that. When they were talking about adopting VDI, when they were talking about, adopting application virtualization, whatever it was, they would determine what the architecture would be based upon, the price per gig. Now, there are new conversations that are happening, specifically, with the new role, right, the cloud architect. So, we still have the traditional storage teams, influencing what's going on, which I think any of us would expect, and that's kind of only natural. But, we also have these cloud architects who are, a little less specialized, when it comes to one specific thing that they do. They're more about the complete vision of what's happening inside of the enterprise for the customer. So what ESG is estimating is that, storage, right, the storage long-term view is that, 32% are saying it will become less specialized. It will become based on more commoditized hardware and software delivered from within the virtualization stack. So when we talk about storage delivered within the virtualization stack, this is a very important kind of point of delineation to make. That doesn't necessarily mean virtualized storage. right? Where you're talking about having a virtualized controller head in front of a bunch of Clarions and VNXs and all of this other stuff, right? That's been around for years. When we talk about real storage virtualization, we're talking about baking the storage into the virtual stack, all right? We look at other points of compression, and probably the one that's most significant is that 6%, that green mark right there, where we talk about the folks that are saying, there's going to be a point of compression for storage that will be offloaded into the cloud. And what that means is that this current storage here, right, the specialized silo for storage, as well as where we're seeing storage going with storage virtualization and integrated into the virtualization stack, needs to be able to integrate with what we're doing in the cloud. So all of this has to play very well together. And this is where VMware feels we're uniquely positioned. So now with that, let's talk about software-defined storage and what that means with VSAN. So the idea is that if we're able to take the operational model that we applied to compute so many years ago when we, invented, x86 virtualization. Before that, it had always been, electrical-based isolation for machines, stuff that was, done on mainframes. We brought it into the x86 space where everyone started adopting it and created and continued to control that market. But if we're able to do the same thing with storage, then effectively we're able to create a virtual data plane, the same as we did inside of distributed switching. The same thing we did with the introductions and the advancements into security with things like vShield. So being able to separate out the data and control layers to the point where we now are not only able to integrate with an existing bit of SAN or an existing NAS that's sitting out there, but to also integrate with the hypervisor converged storage with things like virtual SAN, as well as cloud object storage. This takes us back to that pie chart where we're talking about everything integrating together and doing so seamlessly. If we're able to connect into all of this and to abstract it, just like we did with compute, then the next conversation becomes around what else can we do. And VMware believes we know very clearly what the next thing to do. We're able then to include virtualization-centric data services. We're able to integrate our vision of data protection, mobility, and performance, not only inside of the existing storage, the future storage, but also inside of the storage that we're proposing with VSAN, so that everything is taking advantage of this larger, more virtualization-centric plane. Once we have the services baked in, we're able to control everything through policy. And that's where we start to see the realized vision of things like vCloud Automation Center and having real policy-based automation and orchestration for the virtual machines where everything knows where it should go based upon what it is and what its task is today. So effectively, how does virtual SAN work? So I'm going to give you the super simple overview here of virtual SAN, right? What it means. So there's a couple ways to approach it. The first thing to remember is that a virtual SAN cluster requires a minimum of 3 hosts. Okay, that's where it's got to start. So you start with 3, and you can go up to a maximum of 32. Which is a pretty outstanding number. In beta, it was only 8. Now let's just take a step back for a minute and realize that all those folks out of 12,000 people saying that virtual SAN was going to revolutionize, the storage components of the data center and do for storage what vSphere did for compute, they were viewing it based upon, a maximum of 8 nodes. And then when we went to GA, we quadrupled that. So if you start out with 3, each one of them needs to have 1 solid-state drive and at least 1 spinning disk. Pretty basic stuff. When you're talking to your customers, just remember that each one of those nodes needs to contain 1 solid-state and at least 1 spinning disk. Okay? We won't get into mins and maxes on this call. We'll show you a little bit, but we'll save that for a different conversation. Once those hosts have been added into a vSphere cluster, then we're able to take the storage from all of those hosts and bring them into a clustered VSAN data store. At that point, all of that storage is now being controlled and integrated down at the host kernel. Okay? That means we're talking about the fastest possible instruction reading for storage that you could potentially achieve, because there is no secondary appliance. All right? It runs on your standard servers. It's embedded right inside of vSphere. There's nothing else to deploy or to build up, and it's already optimized for Flash. Okay? And it's exceptionally simple. Like I said, when we went to GA, we went up to a total of 32 nodes, which is pretty amazing. In addition, virtual SAN is highly resilient. We talk about, again, this is a cluster-based technology, and so because of that, it plays very, very nicely inside of high availability technologies that you're already familiar with. It's set up via policy, and it is delivered on a per virtual machine basis. So again, the same way high availability looks at the cluster, so does virtual SAN, because it's integrated right into that cluster format. Because of that, it ensures that we have zero downtime from disk or network failure. When HA gets triggered, virtual SAN springs into action as well. And because it's operating at the cluster, anything that your customer needs to do when they talk about maintenance and when they're starting to have conversations around their recovery time objective and the recovery point objective, some of you, I hope, are having conversations that involve the terms RPO and RTO. This is the data that you need to reference during that conversation. You need to be talking about how fast are you able to recover, in what recovery time, and how much data are you able to recover? What is your recovery point? Virtual SAN's high availability gives you that capacity to have that conversation. Again, as I mentioned, if there is a failure, then it's going to be able to exercise its own resiliency and availability inside of the cluster, because it is integrated right back down into the kernel, and it can move that machine to another disk where it's able to gain access again. Virtual SAN also allows for 2 different types of scaling. It allows for elasticity in its ability to scale up and its ability to scale out. You can take a virtual SAN data store and you can scale up from just having, as we mentioned, that 1 solid state drive and 1 spinning disks. You can bring that up to 1 solid state drive and up to 5 spinning disks per host. And that only comprises just one part of that host. You can then multiply that about 5 more times. Now, inside of these hosts, you're also allowed to scale out. As we mentioned, you can add more nodes. Once you add more nodes, we're able to distribute the I/O across those nodes because of all of the great work you're already doing in your architectural designs with your distributed switching, etc. And, as I mentioned, we have, one typo here. which is that it isn't a maximum of 16 nodes per cluster. You're looking at a maximum of 32 nodes per virtual SAN cluster. And this is, pretty fantastic. If we look at, the numbers that are actually there today, once we talk GA, we're looking at, over, I believe it's 4.4 petabytes of capacity. And we're currently benchmarked at, plus or minus around 2 million IOPS inside of that 32 node cluster. So this is, when we talk about scale, this can get very big, very fast as needed. One of the great architectural conundrums that I know I always used to run into, you start whiteboarding, you look at things, a lot of you are doing a lot with, end user compute. VDI is continuing to, gain adoption with every passing day. But because of that, the architects always have, interesting conversations and conundrums around, how much storage do I need? How much is this storage going to cost me? And oftentimes that's a real sticking point when it comes to VDI. One of the beauties inside of virtual SAN is it takes one key conversation off the table, and that is, how many LUNs do we need to have in order to execute this? Because it's all based back into the cluster for vSphere, we don't have to worry about the LUN conversation anymore, and so that allows for significantly more architectural freedom. I've been talking a lot about the integration and how it plays with vSphere. So let's look at just kind of how it's integrated into the vSphere stack. And each one of these should be a call to action conversation when you're with your customer. So if we look at, how it's integrated, inside of vSphere, like we mentioned, it's part of the cluster. It's a cluster-based technology, so it's integrated into HA. It's also integrated into storage vMotion and DRS. It's already integrated into our data protection model. So when we use things like vSphere replication and we talk about vSphere data protection advanced, they're already integrated and woven into the ideas around virtual SAN. Also, when we look at management, a lot of you are out there doing a lot surrounding vCenter with operations management jump starts and Hey everyone, I hope you can hear me. I don't know what happened there. I think it was just a phone issue. I apologize. But as I was mentioning, even when we look at the stuff you all are doing inside of operations and some of those jumpstart services, etc., then we're able to talk about this integration. We have that story back again. Additionally, disaster recovery, and as I mentioned, virtual desktop integration. These are two fantastic places to bring up virtual SAN. You've heard me say this, and I want to kind of draw this into focus for you. Before, you all may have been familiar with the vSphere storage appliance, the VSA. And there are a lot of other storage appliances out there. There's some of the free stuff that people still use out there as well. But it's important to understand that those were storage virtual appliances. Okay? That was another application that was running on top of the infrastructure So it was creating more load, it was creating more requirements, it was another point, that you had to patch and maintain and deal with. Virtual SAN does not require an appliance. It is functional right down at the virtual kernel. That's why there is nothing else to deploy. Right? It's simply a click to enable, just like you would high availability or distributed resource scheduling. All of that is the exact same functional technology that we see inside of virtual SAN. And because of that, it's able to streamline the data path because we don't have information having to go here from the storage up into the appliance and back down into the other machines. Everything is right back at the compute stack at the kernel. Additionally, we take advantage of those solid-state drives that I mentioned, and because of our integration of the solid-state drives, we're able to use that as a read cache so that we're able to optimize storage for things like virtual desktop infrastructures that are highly read intensive. We're able to make kind of a best foot forward and also a most economical foot forward for a lot of those conversations. If we look at some key benefits, I wouldn't necessarily say that I agree that it installs in 2 clicks. I think it's probably, maybe somewhere around 5 or 6, but that's just me. But let's just say it installs in a handful of clicks. I think we can, fairly well agree with, we'll go with a handful. And it is managed directly from the vSphere web client, completely policy-based, and again, it's self-tuning. You can also determine whether or not you want to make it, automatic, or whether you want higher levels of control and manual control over the virtual SAN. Like we said, these numbers we've already blown past these. We're talking, about millions of IOPS inside of, a 32-node cluster, and we're also seeing the advantages of our decision to integrate flash into those storage blocks. I mentioned before how simple it is. I included a screenshot here for simplicity. This is a cluster dialog inside of the vSphere web client. Those of you who have seen me do some of the demonstrations on virtual SAN have seen me actually, turn this on and how to use it and what it does. That's effectively it. That's your first mouse click right there, is to turn on the virtual SAN. Once you've turned it on, at that point, it's really just a matter of, picking which disks you want to use. So just like everything else in the cluster, it's just one more function. So what does it look like when it's fully grown? Well, it can get really scary, and this is actually only 1/4 of its size. If we notice here, I was talking that at GA we had a total of 8. So take this whole big picture and multiply this by 4, and you'll have a picture of what a real virtual SAN cluster can be. So we mentioned it all starts here. One of each. And then we allow customers to continue to grow and scale up. They can add even more disk groups per host. Right? I said a total of 5. And once they've scaled up as far as they can, then we allow them to linearly scale out, again, to a multiplier of 4 on this chart. Now you can see when we're talking about 4.4 plus petabytes of storage and over 2 million IOPS, how we're getting there. But if we look at the beauty of it, for the customers who may not necessarily be that mature just yet, maybe they don't have a SAN at all, and they're just looking for an economical way to enter the market, then you can still take that customer and you can start them out with 3 hosts with a solid state drive each and one spinning disk. And that becomes the basis for what can grow in every direction to be a very, very formidable storage system for them, and will allow them to integrate with everything else they want to do in the future. So let's talk about some packaging, positioning, and use cases for virtual SAN. So again, packaging, it's available in a standalone. So the standalone, we don't have any scale limits. It includes the functionality for the vSphere distributed switch. That is very, very important. For those of you that are familiar with your vSphere licensing, you know that normally the vSphere distributed switch is not a function that you get until you get to Enterprise Plus. So, a great conversation to have for customers that are evaluating cost versus benefit for things like virtual SAN. You can integrate the talk about the vSphere distributed switch, because at that point, they're getting a significant amount more value inside of their cluster when it comes to functionality and scale. We also offer it for virtual SAN for desktop, okay? And that's going to be based on concurrent user licenses, the same way you would license Horizon View. Okay? If we look at some of the bundles that are available, a bundle that we have, coming out right now, it's effectively a soft bundle. So it's got one virtual SAN standalone license plus one vSphere Data Protection Advanced standalone license. And that, just like the standalone, is per CPU, and it currently is promotional. You'll want to reach out to your distributor for more content on that. So it's important to understand that it is licensed just like vSphere, just like vCloud Suite. It's based per CPU. If you do want to use it strictly for desktop, then you can license virtual SAN based upon user concurrency. So some pricing and packaging, so that you know where vSAN is positioned. If you look at the basic standalone, the standalone for virtual SAN is currently priced at $24.95 per CPU. Again, this includes the distributed switch, and you must license all CTUs in a cluster. Question we often get is if I have a host that I'm putting into the cluster that is not contributing storage, do I still have to license it for virtual SAN? And at this time, the answer that I've gotten back is yes, because it is going to participate in the virtual SAN access. So the best recommendation I could give somebody would be to say, build out your clusters with the idea that everything's going to contribute to virtual SAN, unless you just absolutely have some errant storage or errant systems that you want to throw in there so that they're accessing it but not necessarily contributing to it. Additionally, we have the standalone based upon user concurrency, so $50 per concurrent user, and that starts in 10-pack licenses, and that would be for use with Horizon View. Additionally, I mentioned some of the launch promotions right now, and these include virtual SAN with data protection. Actually, I just had a question here. Somebody asked me to explain the disk groups again. One solid-state drive and 5 or 7 spinning disks. So what it is it's one solid-state drive. The 5 is the total number of disk groups that you can have. Okay, so the 5 is the limitation on the number of times you can multiply out that configuration. And we'll take another look back at that here in a moment. But going back into the bundled promos, there is also a promotion for people moving from VSA to VSAN. Obviously, that's going to be a conversation where you're going to want to really qualify it, because they may or may not have the physical resources required to move from VSA to VSAN, again, because of the solid state disk requirement for configuration. So if we look at some of the conversational mapping, the pain points for virtual SAN. A lot of customers are currently facing, complexity in provisioning. They're looking at, as they're continuing to decrease the amount of IT and siloed-based staff that they have kind of a lack of those traditional skill sets inside of storage. So they're looking for the folks that they have to be able to do more. And so, some great, identifying, qualifying questions to ask, is storage complex for you to provision right now? How many people do you have to go through in order to get storage provisioned? What are the requirements for it? Who do you have inside of your company that has, storage certifications? And maybe asking them what their current storage, outline is. Then, we'll be able to, identify, do they have, if they say, hey, we're strictly using EMC, or we're strictly using NetApp, or strictly using Clarion, or whatever, then say, well, do you have somebody certified in all of those on staff? Then that could be a great way to open the door when you talk about virtual SAN. And probably the biggest one, you have a hard time keeping up with capacity requirements. The simplest way to ask that question is, are you always ahead of your capacity needs when it comes to storage? I'd say it's probably going to be about a 60-40 split, people who say no to yes. If we look at the important capabilities to stress during your conversation, the biggest two are easily, the fact that you can integrate high resiliency through the cluster-based technology, and its interoperability and the way it's woven into the entire VMware stack. Because so many of your customers have already adopted vSphere so wholeheartedly, this just becomes a very organic next step for them. Right. Later in the conversation, you can talk about, scale, and then going into policy-based management. Right. Scale may be a little higher in the conversational hierarchy, depending upon, the maturity of your customer. If you have a customer who's, more mature and they're looking to actually replace their ideas around, physical storage integration, and they're wanting to go toward, virtualized compute, virtualized storage, and virtualized network, then, obviously scale is a little more important to them. But this just kind of gives you an idea, and this was inside of the beta community, and these were the features that they thought were, highest on their list as they started to play with virtual SAN. So if we look at it versus other storage alternatives, I think probably the biggest thing to put out there is that, when we're talking about, hyper-converged, things like, SimpliVity or Scale.io or whatever it is, you can have a replace conversation, but at the end of the day, it's also equally important to understand that this is not necessarily a competitive tool. Virtual SAN is functionally different than things like Nutanix and SimpliVity for one very key reason. And if you have a pen or a pencil, I'll ask you to write this down. It's because that virtual SAN leverages object-based storage as opposed to block and file. This means that when you're having conversations around cloud integration, preparing for highly scalable, elastic type of storage, then you can integrate the talk about virtual SAN using object-based storage as opposed to block and file. I have another session that I do where we actually have a primer on object-based storage, so be sure to connect with your distributor and see when that's coming up. And we may also have recordings of that we could make available to you in a little 10-minute snippet inside of our shorter sessions. But so the lesson here is that we're not necessarily always having to have a replace conversation, which is great for you. You don't always have to jump in and be saying, well, if you want to use virtual SAN, you have to stop using something else. You can have the conversation where you can use virtual SAN and something else. And in a traditional storage environment, it's very much a complement conversation, because a lot of the storage that people have is just spinning disk. Because we're integrating, again, at the kernel layer, and we're integrating those solid-state drives for the read and buffer and write cache, we're able to provide that higher performance storage tier inside of the, you'll forgive me, we're able to provide the higher level storage tier, higher performance storage tier inside of their virtual infrastructure. Specifically, when we talk about, EMC products, I found this, I wanted to give you guys kind of a great way, to use as a descriptor, when we, start spreading this around. So EMC has, three really, hyper-present products in the market. One is Scale.io. Obviously that's, hyper-converged infrastructure. If you're having a Scale.io conversation, you can integrate VSAN, by talking about, using this specifically for the vSphere environments and leveraging Scale.io for, maybe some of the physical environments, all right? And then if you're looking at Viper focuses primarily on management of heterogeneous external SAN and NAS arrays, so kind of a very formidable and traditional virtualized storage as opposed to storage virtualization. VSAN and Viper kind of address different use cases. So you would use something like Viper if they have, maybe they have a conversation, they're talking about Clarion and like I said, EqualLogic and, maybe some VNX, and we're wanting to bring it all together from a physical standpoint. That's where you would use something like a virtualized storage head to help them manage that. And then you can have a side conversation about virtual SAN, for the rest of their virtualized workloads. And then with things like Extreme.io, talking about, kind of the different use cases, that's going to be probably the one that will get, I would say, the quickest call to an architect, because that's going to be predicated upon the use case for things like VDI. How are they using it? Obviously, if they're using that type of I/O throughput for a bank teller, it's going to be a different conversation than if they're using it for, let's say, an oil drilling rig in the middle of Iran or something like that. So, two very different conversations. Make sure that you bring in your architects as necessary. But it's important to know that just like with all of the products, when you look at virtual SAN in conjunction with physical storage, we very much complement all of the physical storage that's out there. It's really just more about the use case and the environment where we're going to be using it. And then inside of some of the virtualized storage, the SimpliVity and Nutanix and et cetera, that's where we have a little bit different conversation, how we can complement and how we may have feature differences that are going to be more suited for a specific workload. Some great initial use cases, virtual desktop. Somebody asked me a moment ago if there were some best practices documents for VSAN with VDI, and I believe there are some in the works. We have some white papers that are out there right now. If you look on PartnerWeb, you'll find some great stuff, inside of the virtual SAN documentation. But if you don't, please reach out to your VMware personnel here at the distributor so that they can connect you with the right documents and be able to give you the insight that you need. But a great place to start talking about virtual SAN is inside of VDI. In my experience, the VDI conversation always started to fall apart, really, when, people, and I'm going to swap back here for 1 second, if you'll give me just a minute. I want to make sure that I can see all of you. Yeah, I see that you guys lost my screen. Not quite sure what happened. Guys, I need to apologize. Experiencing technical difficulties today, and I'm not entirely sure just why. Okay. Hopefully that should be a lot better. I have really no clue what happened there. Thank you all for being so patient. I appreciate it. Can someone who is just out there, they asked me that you can see my presentation. You can see my screen now. Where did I lose you? Did I lose you on the positioning with talking about the different solutions or the use cases? Just say A or B. It'll be fine. Okay, great. Okay, so we'll just burn through this really, really fast. So like I said, based upon whether you're talking about virtual or physical, determines whether or not we're having a conversation about use case or whether we're talking about complement or replace. Inside a virtual desktop, we have, like I said, because virtual SAN is so read complementary and because virtual desktop is so read intensive, they marry very naturally. Before I got cut off, one of the things that I was telling you is, it seems like every conversation that I was in, in years past, was strictly surrounded, hey, we think VDI is great, but the storage is going to crush our budget. Now you can talk about virtual SAN and integrate it at, for VDI at $50 per concurrent user. And you can even really tailor that number by, bringing in an architect to go through their use cases, because they may have 1,000 users, but they may only have 400 or 500 of those 1,000 that are actually accessing it concurrently. So remember, you would only license for, that 400 or 500 because they're accessing it at any given time. So this gives you a lot of flexibility there with that conversation. Additionally, we look at Tier 2, Tier 3, and DR. These are places where, honestly, a few years back, where vSphere got adopted. We were talking about virtualized, storage, and where VDI started to get adopted. It was first in dev test, et cetera. So if you have a customer that might not be, full bore ready to adopt, storage virtualization, they may have the need or desire to want to look at, just integrating it for test dev or wanting to integrate it in their DR target on their secondary site. And because we integrate with vSphere replication and site recovery management, it all kind of feeds back into that ecosystem conversation. Yeah, somebody mentioned that this gives you more granular VDI scalability. That's actually a tremendously great point. Because you're talking about being able to scale your architecture for VDI, not in great big chunks, where you're having to add a whole ton of storage and then kind of incubate your way up. If they need a little bit more scale, they need to add another 150, 200 users, whatever it is, then you can leverage our ready nodes, which I'll show you here in just a moment, to be able to provide them that type of scale. That's a great comment. Thank you for that. And like we said, it allows for, granularity and scale, the interoperability with View, and also, that read optimization. Because vSAN integrates with things like SRM, we also have, the ability to have conversations when we're looking at virtual SAN as a DR target. Maybe they have, an existing storage area network in their primary data center, and then they want to leverage virtual SAN inside of the recovery site. Okay, this helps them reduce the TCA and the TCO inside of that recovery site, and also simplify the management and testing and reportability for it, and allow you to have new conversations regarding, the RPO and RTO numbers with your customers. so that you can open up new drag opportunities for compute, et cetera, without having storage being, the one hanging point. 2 ways to build a virtual SAN node. We have just absolutely tons of VSAN ready nodes. There is a document that will be forwarded to all of you and is also available on Partner Web. But our folks here will send it to you, everybody on the call, so that you have a full list of pre-configured server ready to use virtual SAN nodes. We've got multiple configurations from Dell, IBM, Cisco, Supermicro is a great one that's out there now too, as well as Fujitsu. And the numbers are increasing every single day. As we see more of them get tested, we're seeing the list grow kind of exponentially every couple of days. So, be sure to connect with your folks here so that they can keep you with an updated list. And all you really need is to take that list, and the list will include in each one of those configurations approximately how many virtual machines it is designed to support based upon what virtual machine configuration. So, to the comment they were talking about granular VDI scalability, if they say, hey, I want to add 200 virtual machines to my VDI, then you can look at your ready node configuration table, and if you've got a node that will handle, 100 virtual desktops, then you can offer them 2 of those, and they should be good to go. They plug those in, and virtual SAN takes over, and they're off to the races. So we've made it super, super simple. And inside of each one of those, there's tons of different options as well. If you don't see anything on the list that works for you, you're also allowed to refer to our hardware compatibility list, and you can build out your own. Just, again, make sure that you're using one SSD and at least one spinning disk. A great rule of thumb for the SSD versus spinning disk, and I'll write it here so that you guys have it in the recording, is that you use about a 1:10 ratio between the solid-state drive and the spinning disk. Okay, so the solid-state drive is 1/10 of the total storage that you're configuring for that device. That gives you kind of the right rule of thumb to start, and then you can have additional conversations going forward if it's more read intensive than that. But those are kind of our initial best practices to get you off to the races. Some key points to remember before we wrap up. It's just a license. There are no additional components. You can now build a VSAN cluster up to 32 hosts. Our estimated maximums, 4.4 petabytes worth of storage, about 2 million IOPS, handling approximately 3,200 VMs, and that references back to those ready node conversations. It is purchased per physical CPU, like vSphere, or per concurrent user in view environments. And we'll go ahead and kind of draw a line through that, because there are currently way more than 13 ready node options for you. In fact, I think there's 13 just inside of Dell alone. So there's tons and tons of stuff. Guys, with that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and kill the recording, and then we'll open it up to a few more questions and make sure that everyone has a copy of this. And if you are dropping off, thank you very much for your time.